The night was heavy with silence, the kind that made every breath sound too loud. The moon hung low over the desert, spilling its pale light across the sleeping land. The air smelled of dust, sage, and smoke from a dying fire. In the distance, a coyote cried out, a lonely, haunting sound that faded into the darkness. Near the edge of a shallow canyon, a man sat beside the embers, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if watching for ghosts. His skin bore the sun's deep mark, and the faint scars across his chest told stories of battles fought and survived. He was an Apache warrior, strong and silent, carrying the weight of a past that refused to fade. He wasn't waiting for an enemy that night. He was waiting for her. She came quietly, the soft rustle of her dress barely touching the air. Her steps were cautious but sure, and when the firelight caught her face, the flicker revealed a mix of fear and longing. She was young, with eyes that seemed out of place in this wild land, eyes that had seen comfort once, but now carried the dust of hardship. She stopped a few feet from him, her voice trembling like the flame between them. "They'll find out," she whispered. The warrior lifted his head slowly, his gaze steady and calm. "Then let them," he said. She shook her head, tears glimmering against the firelight. "You don't understand. They'll hang you." He rose to his feet, tall and proud against the moonlight. "I understand," he said softly, "but I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of losing you." Her breath caught, and for a moment the fear in her eyes gave way to something deeper, something she couldn't hide no matter how hard she tried. He stepped closer, the faint smell of smoke and earth around him, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Only you forever," whispered the Apache warrior in the darkness. Those words sank deep into her, filling the quiet space between them with a kind of truth that frightened her more than death itself. She wanted to believe him, to trust that love could exist beyond the cruel rules of men and bloodlines. But somewhere in the wind she could already hear the voices of the town, angry, suspicious, and ready to destroy anything they didn't understand. She looked at him, her voice breaking. "We can't stay here," he nodded. "Then we go where they cannot find us." The desert stretched endless around them, vast and merciless. Yet beneath the moon, it felt like the only place in the world where their love could exist. He took her hand, his fingers rough and warm, and together they began walking into the night. Every step they took carried the weight of danger, but neither looked back. Behind them, the fire died, leaving only the stars to bear witness to their secret. By dawn, they had reached the ridge overlooking the valley. The land below shimmered gold beneath the first light, quiet and untouched. The warrior stopped, scanning the horizon. His senses were sharp. He could feel when something wasn't right. His hand tightened around hers. "They're coming," he said. She froze. "How far?" He pointed toward the thin trail of dust rising in the distance. "Riders, a search party." Panic rose in her chest, but he pulled her close. "We'll go through the canyons. The wind will cover our tracks." She nodded, trusting him. Together they moved swiftly, slipping between rocky walls and narrow paths carved by time. The canyons whispered with the echoes of old spirits, and sometimes the wind carried faint songs of the people who had once walked there. To her, it sounded like the earth itself was warning them. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning their skin and drying their lips. Still, they pressed on, stopping only when shadows began to fall again. In the distance, a hawk circled. The warrior's eyes followed it for a long time. "The land watches us," he murmured. She sat beside him, too tired to speak. Her mind drifted to her home, a place of fences and laws, where people looked at her now with suspicion, for reasons they couldn't say aloud. She had left behind everything for him, her family, her name, her place among the settlers. Yet sitting beside him, even in the danger and hunger, she felt more alive than she ever had. That night, they found shelter beneath an overhang of rock. The warrior built a small fire, its glow faint and warm against the stone. She leaned against him, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady as the earth itself. He told her stories of his people, of how the stars were the eyes of ancestors, watching and guiding the living. She listened in silence, imagining those same stars looking down upon them, wondering what fate had planned. Then came the sound, distant hooves echoing against the canyon walls. He stiffened. She felt the fear rise in her throat. "They've found us," she whispered. The warrior rose quickly, putting out the fire with a sweep of sand. "Stay low," he said, his voice calm but urgent. He moved to the mouth of the canyon, his shadow blending with the stone. The riders were close now, their torches flickering like small fires in the darkness. She crawled toward him, trembling. "Please, don't fight them. We can run. There has to be another way." He turned, his eyes softening. "If we run forever, they'll still come. They will never stop until one of us is gone." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then it will be me. I'll go back. I'll tell them it was my fault. Maybe they'll let you live." He shook his head slowly. "No, they'll never believe that. You are one of them, and I am not. That is enough for them to kill." His words hung heavy in the air. She knew he was right. The world they lived in had no place for what they shared. Love between a settler's daughter and an Apache warrior was not a story that ended with forgiveness, it ended with blood. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing off the stone like thunder. He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "If they take me," he whispered, "remember what I said? Only you, forever." Her lips trembled, but before she could speak, he pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. For a heartbeat, everything went still, the air, the earth, even time itself. Then he stepped away, gripping the knife at his side, his body silhouetted against the flickering torchlight that crept closer. She wanted to call out, to beg him to come back, but her voice caught in her chest. All she could do was watch as he disappeared into the shadows, the sound of his footsteps fading into the canyon. Moments later, torches appeared, carried by the men who had once been her neighbors. Their faces were hard, their eyes filled with the cold certainty of justice twisted by hate. She pressed herself against the rock, praying they wouldn't see her. From somewhere deeper in the canyon, a cry rang out, sharp and fierce, then cut short by the echo of gunfire. Her heart stopped. The men shouted, their voices bouncing off the walls as they searched the dark. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, her body shaking. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then silence returned, complete and crushing. She waited, afraid to move. Then, from the distance, came the faintest sound, a whisper carried by the wind, soft and haunting. "Only you, forever." Her eyes filled with tears. Whether it was his voice or her mind breaking, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that the words stayed with her, drifting through the desert night, binding her to him even as the world tore them apart. When the dawn finally came, the canyon stood quiet, the riders gone, the air still heavy with smoke. She rose slowly, her hands trembling as she looked toward the east, where the sun was rising red and gold over the endless land. Somewhere beyond those hills, she believed, his spirit was watching her, and though she was alone, she whispered back into the wind, "Only you, forever." The words carried across the valley, vanishing into the morning light, leaving behind a promise that time could never break. Yet deep in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. The story had only begun. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a sweltering expanse of gold and brown. She moved slowly along the ridge, each step careful, as if the earth itself might betray her. The morning air smelled of dry sand and distant pine, a faint reminder that somewhere beyond the canyons, life went on, indifferent to the stories of the few who dared to defy it. Her body ached, her lips cracked from thirst, yet she pressed forward, driven by a mix of fear and hope. The warrior's words, "Only you," forever echoed in her mind. A thread of light woven through the shadow of the previous night. She did not know how long she walked before she reached a shallow creek hidden in the folds of the land. Water trickled quietly over smooth stones, its sound a gentle promise of life. Kneeling beside it, she cupped her hands and drank, feeling the cool rush bring her back from the edge of exhaustion. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember who she had been before the world had turned against her. She thought of her home, the little cabin at the edge of the settlement, the faces of people who had once smiled at her without suspicion. That life felt distant now, almost unreal, like a story someone else had told. Yet the wilderness had a way of reminding her that she was alive in the most immediate. Wah! Each rustle of a lizard in the sand, each call of a hawk overhead seemed to speak to her, warning and guiding in equal measure. She had learned in the past hours that survival was not just about running, it was about understanding. Blending with the land, listening when others rushed to act. And she could not shake the feeling that the warrior had left behind more than just the memory of his voice. He had left her with lessons, imprinted not in words alone, but in the way he had moved, silent and deliberate, aware of dangers she had yet to see. Teachings took on new urgency. Every rustle in the brush, every shadow crossing her path, became a signal she could not ignore. The canyon walls, once intimidating, now felt like a protective barrier, guiding her through a maze she did not fully understand. Hours passed, and the sun climbed even higher, the heat pressing down on her shoulders. She moved on, following the contours of the land, her thoughts drifting back to him. Who had he been before the fight, before the night had forced them into secrecy and danger? She had seen only glimpses, moments of quiet strength, a deep compassion for the earth and its creatures, a sense of honor that even fear could not erase. Yet she had also glimpsed a man shaped by battles, a man who had carried loss and pain as others carried the simplest of tools. She wondered if his eyes had always held the same intensity, or if the trials of life had carved that sharpness into them. Her thoughts were interrupted by movement on the ridge above her. She froze, pressing herself against a jagged stone, listening. The wind carried a faint sound, soft, deliberate footsteps. Her heart raced. She could not tell if it was friend or foe. In this land, even a moment's hesitation could be fatal. She held her breath, letting the sounds reach her fully before deciding on a course. The figure moved with careful precision, and she realized it was not one of the men from the settlement. Whoever it was, they knew the land well. The person emerged into a small clearing, and for a brief second, she saw a face youthful but marked by hardship, eyes sharp and watchful. Then the figure vanished again, melting into the shadows of the canyon. Her mind raced. Was it another warrior, perhaps an ally of his? Or someone hunting them, seeking to finish what the men from the settlement had started? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panic would not help her now. She moved on, keeping to the shadowed side of the ridge, letting the sun mark her path only briefly before she slipped back into the cooler rock walls. As she walked, memories of the previous night pressed against her, his whispered words, the feel of his hands, the way he had stood against impossible odds for her. It was not just love that had held them together, but a deep, unspoken understanding of the world around them. He had been a guide, a protector, and in the chaos of those fleeting hours, he had given her more than protection. He had given her purpose. Even now, she realized, she could feel his presence in the smallest details, the patterns of the rocks, the whispers of the wind, the way a hawk circled above as if keeping watch. She had been forced to rely on instincts she did not know she possessed, to trust the lessons he had left behind. And yet fear lingered like a shadow behind every bend. She knew the men from the settlement would not give up easily. They saw what they did not understand as a threat, and in their eyes, that threat must be destroyed. Hours turned into afternoon. The canyon walls began to shift from gold to a muted amber under the dying sun. She finally found a small cave tucked behind a thicket of desert brush, hidden from view and offering shelter from both the sun and potential pursuers. Inside, the air was cooler, and the earth beneath her felt solid and unyielding. She sank to the ground, exhausted but alert, her eyes scanning the entrance. The cave smelled faintly of sage and old stone, a comforting reminder that even in this harsh land, refuge could exist. She pulled from her pack the small scraps of food she had carried and ate quietly, savoring each bite as if it were the last she would ever have. Her thoughts returned to the Apache warrior. She wondered what had driven him to fight so fiercely, to risk so much for her. Was it love alone, or something older, something tied to the honor and code of his people? She had glimpsed his past only briefly, his stories of battles and family, of traditions carried through generations. But now, alone and vulnerable, she realized she wanted to understand more. She wanted to know the world he had come from, the land that had shaped him into the man who had risked everything for her as dusk approached. She heard the faintest sound outside the cave, a whisper of movement, the crunch of stone under careful footsteps. Her body tensed instantly, heart pounding. Whoever it was, they were not far. She gripped the small knife she carried, remembering how he had taught her to hold it, how to strike with purpose rather than fear. Her eyes adjusted to the dimming light, and she saw the shadow of a figure moving just beyond the entrance. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer came. Only the shifting sound of footsteps retreating slightly, then advancing again. She pressed herself against the back wall of the cave, silent, waiting, listening. Every muscle in her body was alert. She could feel the tension in the air, the pull of the unknown, the promise of danger hidden in the dark. Finally, a voice spoke, low and cautious. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her grip on the knife did not relax. "Then why are you following me?" There was a pause, then the voice came again, softer this time. "Because he sent me. He knew you would need help." Her heart leaped. He did. But how? The figure stepped closer into the fading light, revealing a young man, his features strong but unfamiliar, dressed in the leather and cloth of a traveler, not a settler. His eyes held something of the same depth and fire she had seen in the warriors, and for a moment, it was enough to calm the storm inside her. "They knew you would come this far," he said quietly, "and they knew you would survive. But now, you cannot go back. The people who hunt you will not stop, and if they catch you, he will never forgive me if I fail to guide you." She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand answers, but words failed her. She simply nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. Alone, she had survived this far, but alone. She would not survive the next trial. The stranger motioned toward a narrow passage at the side of the cave. "There is a path that leads to the river. You can hide there. I will take you as far as I can, but we must move before nightfall." She rose slowly, following his lead. Her mind raced with thoughts of the warrior, his face, his words, the promise that had carried her through countless dangers. She did not know if she would see him again, if he was alive or trapped, but she knew she had to survive. For him, for the promise, for the whisper of love that had changed everything. As they stepped into the canyon shadows, the air seemed to hold its breath once more. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled, and the wind carried a faint echo, as if reminding her that the world was watching. Waiting, and beneath the wide, endless sky, she realized that the story was far from over. Every step forward pulled her deeper into danger, deeper into the mystery, and deeper into a destiny she could neither predict nor escape. The desert stretched before her, vast and merciless, but for the first time since the night he had whispered those words, she felt a flicker of hope. Not certainty, not safety, but hope enough to keep moving. Enough to face whatever waited in the darkness, and somewhere, just beyond the reach of her sight, she felt the faintest pulse of his presence, as if the Apache warrior still walked with her, guiding, watching, waiting. The canyon air grew colder as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. She followed the stranger through the narrow paths, her muscles aching, but her senses sharpened. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, made her flinch. She could feel the weight of the desert around her, not just the heat or the rocks, but the hidden eyes of a world that had watched countless struggles unfold in silence. The stranger moved with a steady confidence, pausing only when necessary, listening to sounds that she could not hear. She realized quickly that he was no ordinary man. His knowledge of the land, the ways of the wind and the hidden trails, reminded her of the warrior who had saved her. Somehow she sensed a connection between them, though she did not yet understand its depth. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, keeping her voice low. He glanced at her, eyes dark and serious. "Because he asked. And because I owe him a debt I cannot yet explain. You are part of that debt." She frowned, uncertainty tightening her chest. "A debt? What do you mean?" He shook his head. It is not for you to know yet. Focus on staying alive, she nodded, biting back the fear that threatened to spill. Every step forward brought new dangers. She remembered the torches of the settlers, the angry eyes, the sound of gunfire, and the echo of the warrior's voice calling her name, urging her to keep moving. Somehow, those memories were both comfort and torment, a reminder that the world outside the canyon was still hunting them as night fell. They reached a small ridge overlooking a wide valley. The river below glimmered like liquid silver under the moonlight. The stranger crouched beside her, pointing silently toward the distant bank. We can rest there. The water will cover our tracks. She lowered herself carefully, heart pounding, imagining the danger still lurking. Somewhere out there, she knew, men searched for her with a certainty born of prejudice and fear. They could not comprehend what they hunted, but they felt threatened enough to destroy it. That realization filled her with both anger and sorrow. Love had brought her to this point, yet the world she had known was determined to crush it before it could even grow. They descended carefully, moving through rocky underbrush and dry reeds, until finally they reached the riverbank. The water lapped gently against the stones, a soothing counterpoint to the tension coiling in her chest. The stranger helped her settle near a shallow bend, where the river's curve shielded them from sight. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. Listening to the faint music of flowing water, "You must know," said quietly. Breaking the silence, "You are not safe here. The men who chase you will not stop at the river. They think of nothing but the punishment they believe is deserved." She clenched her fists. "Because I chose him?" "Yes," he said simply. "And because he is what they fear most. They cannot understand his world, so they try to destroy it. And in the process, they will destroy anything that touches it." Her mind spun with anger and helplessness. She remembered the faces of those who had raised her, who had smiled and welcomed her as a child. Yet now, their hate had taken the form of cold determination, relentless and cruel. She felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her, choices between survival and loyalty, between fear and love, between who she had been and who she had become. As they crouched in the shadows, the stranger spoke again. "There are others who want to help, but their ways are quiet, hidden. You cannot trust easily. But no, the Apache warrior did not leave you because he was careless. He left you because he believed you could carry this story, this fight, further than he could if he remained." She swallowed hard. His words painted a picture of him she had only glimpsed in fragments, brave, steadfast, and willing to face death to protect her. And yet the uncertainty gnawed at her. Where was he now? Was he alive, wounded, captured, or worse? She could not allow her mind to dwell on the worst. But neither could she ignore the fear twisting her chest. Hours passed under the moon, and sleep remained impossible. They spoke little, conserving energy, their eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Occasionally, the wind carried faint whispers, perhaps echoes of distant riders, perhaps just the desert's restless voice. Each sound made her heart pound anew, but each sound also reminded her that she was alive, and that survival was still possible if she remained careful. As dawn approached, they moved again, following the curve of the river upstream. She noticed patterns in the land, the way the stones jutted, the angles of the cliffs, the subtle shifts in vegetation. She began to recognize signs, small indicators of paths and dangers, and she realized that the stranger's guidance was teaching her more than just survival. He was teaching her to see, to listen, to understand the land as the warrior had. During a brief rest, she asked him about his life. "Who are you? Where do you come from?" He looked at her, expression unreadable, before answering. "I was once like you, part of a world that thinks it knows everything. But life in the shadows teaches lessons the light cannot. My past, it is complicated. It is bound to his in ways you will understand when the time comes." She studied him, sensing the layers of history he carried, the unspoken losses, the obligations, the secrets. He was a puzzle, much like the warrior had been. And she realized that her journey was no longer just about survival or love. It was about understanding the world in ways she had never imagined. As the day wore on, The river widened, and signs of human presence became more frequent: footprints, abandoned tools, faint smoke rising in the distance. She stiffened, knowing the hunters were near. "They're here," she whispered. The stranger nodded. "They are always near, but they do not see the world the way we do. We move through it differently. We hide in ways they cannot imagine." They skirted the edges of the river, slipping through reeds and shadows, until they came to a hidden bend where the water carved a small, concealed cove. The stranger gestured for her to follow. "Here," he said, "you can rest. The river will mask your presence, and we can move further under cover of night." She sank to the ground, exhausted. Her mind raced with questions about the warrior, about the settlement, about the strange man guiding her through the wilderness. Each thought carried the weight of uncertainty. Yet every step she had taken, every danger she had evaded, had made her stronger, sharper, more aware of the threads that connected her to a world she could no longer ignore. As night fell, the stranger set up a small signal fire, not for warmth, but for guidance. The flicker danced against the reeds in the river, a subtle marker for anyone else who might be watching. She wondered briefly if it was for the warrior, if he could see it from somewhere distant, and know she had survived another day. Hours passed with tension thick in the air. The sound of animals, the rush of the river, the distant howl of coyotes reminded her of the wilderness's indifference to human struggles. And yet there was a strange beauty in it, a sense that life continued despite fear, despite hatred, despite impossible odds. She did not sleep. Not really. Every sound kept her alert, every shadow hinted at unseen dangers. And deep in her mind, the image of the Apache warrior remained: a man who had risked everything, who had whispered promises in the dark, whose presence lingered like a guiding light she could not yet reach, somewhere beyond the river, beyond the canyons, beyond the reach of the settlers who hunted them. She knew the struggle was far from over. The world remained hostile, cruel, unyielding. And yet, she had discovered a strength within herself she had never known: a resilience, a courage, a willingness to fight for what she believed in, even if it meant moving through darkness without certainty. The night deepened, and the wind carried a faint sound, almost like a whisper, almost like a voice she knew. She turned her head, searching the shadows, hoping against hope that it was him. But all she saw were the reeds, the river, and the dark outlines of the canyon cliffs. Still, the sound lingered, a reminder that the story was not over, that the conflict had only deepened, and that every choice she made now would carry consequences far beyond what she could imagine. And so, she waited, listening to the river, to the wind, to the shadows, knowing that the night would bring more than darkness. It would bring revelations, dangers, and perhaps a path that could lead her closer to him, closer to the truth, or deeper into the peril that had begun the moment the warrior had whispered those fateful words: "Only you." Forever. The desert night held its breath around her, and somewhere in the unseen reaches, the echoes of the past and the promise of what was to come intertwined, leaving her poised on the edge of uncertainty, ready to face whatever awaited in the darkness. The moon rose higher, pale and haunting, casting silver light across the river that twisted like a snake through the valley. She crouched behind a thick cluster of reeds, the stranger beside her, both of them silent, listening. The night was alive with sounds: frogs, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through dry grass, but beneath it all, she could sense something darker, an undercurrent of pursuit that refused to be ignored. The settlers were coming. She could feel it in the tremor of the earth under her hands, in the faint vibration of distant hooves. "They're close," she whispered. Barely moving her lips, the stranger nodded, eyes scanning the shadows. "They've been tracking us since sunrise. We are fortunate the river has slowed them, but they will find another way around. It is only a matter of time." Her stomach nodded. Every step she had taken since the canyon had become their refuge had been a delicate balance of survival and trust. She had learned the land, its hidden paths, the whispers of wind and water that could guide or betray. Yet all that knowledge now felt fragile, like a candle struggling against a rising wind. And somewhere in the back of her mind, She thought of him, the Apache warrior, strong and silent, whose words had carried her through the first nights of fear. Only you. Forever. She did not know where he was, if he was alive or if he was walking into his own peril. The thought made her chest tighten. They moved cautiously along the riverbank, keeping low in the shadows, the water masking their footsteps. Occasionally, the stranger would pause, listening to subtle shifts in the air, the faintest echoes of movement upstream or down. She could see the strain in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders. He had not spoken much of the danger yet, but she knew it was closer than either of them wanted to admit. Suddenly, a flicker of light appeared over the ridge, faint but unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat. Torches. The settlers had split their search, sending another party to flank them. They found another path, the stranger said, voice low, steady, but threaded with urgency. We cannot stay here. We must move. She nodded, swallowing the fear twisting in her throat. They pressed forward, deeper into the reeds, toward a small bluff she had glimpsed earlier. From there, they could see the river curve, the path ahead hidden by cliffs. Every step was tense, every rustle of dry grass a threat. She realized that fear had become a constant companion, a shadow she could not shake. And yet, in the shadow of that fear, a small flame of determination burned. She could not give up. She would not give up, not when he had risked everything for her. By the time they reached the bluff, the torchlight below had grown, flickering like fireflies in the night. The settlers' voices carried across the water, shouting directions, demanding answers, their anger raw and unyielding. She flinched at the sound, but the stranger placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Breathe. Every step we take now must be deliberate. One mistake, one careless sound, and it is over. They crouched, watching the night unfold. From above, she could see the full extent of the hunter's approach. Men moved in groups, scanning the cliffs and the riverbank, weapons glinting in the torchlight. Some seemed impatient, others methodical, but all were relentless. She realized the settlers had underestimated neither the terrain nor the stakes. They were determined, driven by fear and the need to punish, and they would not stop until they had what they sought. We need to cross, the stranger said, motioning toward a narrow point where the river split around a small island. It is shallow enough, but dangerous. We must be quick, silent, and precise. Do not hesitate. Her pulse raced as she followed his lead. Each step into the water felt colder than the last, the river's current tugging at her legs. Every ripple seemed to carry a warning. She thought of the Apache warrior, imagining his strong hands guiding her, his calm presence keeping panic at bay. She whispered the words he had spoken once more, as if calling them could make them real. Only you. Forever. The current tugged stronger near the island, and she nearly lost her footing, but the stranger's grip on her arm steadied her. Behind them, the faint shouts of the settlers grew louder. They were closing in, and the night was full of shadows that could conceal both safety and danger. Once across, they pressed into the reeds, moving as quietly as possible. She could feel the tension in every muscle, every nerve alert to the slightest sound. The river seemed to whisper around them, carrying faint echoes of the past and warnings of the future. She realized how fragile their survival had become. One misstep, one careless breath, and it could all be over. Hours passed as they navigated the river's edge. Finally finding a hidden grove of trees that offered partial cover, she sank to the ground, exhausted, her mind racing. She thought of him again, of the warrior's strength, his honor, his love. Where was he now? Was he walking through another canyon, fighting his own battle? Or had the settlers caught up to him already? The thought made her stomach churn. She felt a sharp longing, a mix of fear and hope, and a determination she had never known before. The stranger crouched beside her, eyes scanning the darkened tree line. We cannot stop for long. They will not rest, and neither can we. But here, for a moment, we can breathe. She nodded, gripping her knees. I have to find him, she whispered. I have to know he's alive. The stranger's eyes softened, though the tension in his jaw did not ease. "You will. But you must survive first. He would not forgive you if you risked yourself recklessly. You have come this far because you listen, because you move with care. That must continue." She swallowed hard, understanding the truth of his words. Survival required more than courage. It required patience, awareness, and an almost supernatural sense of timing. She had learned that in the past nights, but now, with the hunters closing in, the stakes had never felt higher. As darkness deepened, a sudden noise made her freeze a snap of a branch upstream. The stranger gestured for her to stay low. She pressed herself against the damp earth, heart pounding. Shadows moved, flickering in the torchlight. The settlers had split their party again, some moving upstream, some downstream, all converging on their position. "They're surrounding us," she whispered. The stranger's jaw tightened. "Then we must use the land, the cliffs, the trees, the river itself. Every step we take must turn their strength against them. If they catch sight of us, we can vanish, but only if we are careful, only if we are clever." Her breath came in short, quick bursts. The river's rush, the whispering wind, the distant calls of wildlife, it all seemed magnified, warning her, guiding her, reminding her of the precariousness of their position. Every instinct she had learned from the warrior, every skill the stranger had taught her, was now tested against men who would not hesitate to kill for fear and misunderstanding. Suddenly, a shout pierced the night, a cry of alarm from one of the settlers. Her heart leaped. They had seen something. The stranger grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows of the trees. The night became a blur of movement, of whispering reeds, of splashing feet in the river. Every second carried life or death, and the air itself seemed to tighten around them. Pressing on her lungs from the tree line, she glimpsed torches bobbing in the darkness. The men moving closer, voices loud, angry, commanding. Her hands shook as she clutched the stranger's arm. He did not falter, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, searching for every possible advantage. "They are near," he muttered. "Hold steady. Do not make a sound." She nodded, teeth clenched, trying to slow the racing of her heart. She thought of the Apache warrior once more, imagining him beside her, guiding her, protecting her with the same strength he had shown in the past. She whispered the words under her breath, a prayer, a promise, a lifeline. "Only you. Forever." The night seemed to stretch, each minute dragging into the next, filled with the threat of discovery. The settlers' voices echoed closer, the crunch of their boots against stone and sand louder with each step. Her pulse was deafening in her ears, but the stranger remained calm, moving with a precision and silence that seemed almost impossible. Then, in the distance, she heard a faint whistle, low and haunting, carried on the wind. Her blood ran cold. It was a signal, one she recognized from the stories he had told her, one that spoke of warnings, of danger, of forces unseen. She realized in that moment that the night was about to change, that the next moments could decide everything. The stranger's eyes met hers, steady and commanding. "Prepare yourself," he whispered. "The moment is coming. Everything depends on what we do next." She nodded, gripping her knife tightly. Her mind raced with the possibilities, the dangers, the hope that he might still be alive somewhere, watching, waiting. The river whispered beside her, the wind carried secrets through the trees, and the shadows seemed to shift as if aware of the approaching storm. Somewhere ahead, the settlers moved like predators, unaware of the hidden paths, unaware that the land itself could be their enemy. And somewhere just out of reach, the Apache warrior's presence lingered in her memory, a reminder of courage, of love, and of the fight that still awaited. The night tightened around them, suspense thick in the air. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a choice. And the climax of their struggle loomed closer, unseen but inevitable. She felt it in her bones, in the trembling of the earth beneath her, in the whisper of the wind that seemed to say, "The time is near." And soon, nothing would be the same. The river curved. The trees whispered, and the hunters advanced. Somewhere in the darkness, the Apache warrior waited, unseen but not forgotten, and she realized, with every nerve alert, that the moment that would define everything, the moment where courage, love, and fate collided was approaching faster than she could imagine. The night held its breath, the world poised on the edge, and she knew that whatever happened next would test everything she had learned, every bond she had formed, and every promise she had ever heard whispered in the darkness, only you, forever. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the canyon, painting the rocks in soft shades of gold and amber. The night had been long, tense, and unforgiving, but somehow, against all odds, she had survived. Her body ached from exhaustion. Her hands were raw from gripping the knife and climbing over jagged stones. But a deep, steady rhythm of hope coursed through her chest. Somewhere, she knew the Apache warrior was alive, or at least his presence lingered in the strength he had instilled in her. The river that had been both refuge and challenge glimmered under the sun, its surface calm and reassuring. The stranger led her along a hidden path, careful to stay in the shadows, alert for any sign of the settlers who had hunted them so relentlessly. Yet as they moved, the air itself seemed to shift, lighter now, as if the danger that had pressed down on them for so long was beginning to ease. She realized for the first time in days that survival was not just about moving forward. It was about understanding, about reading the land, about trusting the instincts he had helped her awaken. They stopped briefly on a small ridge overlooking the valley below. She gazed across the vast expanse of desert and river, the familiar peaks and canyons stretching endlessly. A part of her wanted to cry, to release all the tension that had built up. But instead, she breathed deeply, letting the wind carry away her fear. The stranger glanced at her, his expression unreadable. But she thought she saw a flicker of approval in his eyes. "You've done well," he said quietly. Most would have faltered long before now. Her lips trembled, but she managed a small nod. "I couldn't have done it without him," she whispered, thinking of the Apache warrior, the man whose voice and courage had guided her from the start. He taught me how to survive, how to trust the land, how to fight even when the odds were impossible. The stranger's gaze shifted to the horizon. "He is still out there, I have no doubt. The bond between you is stronger than any obstacle they could place in your path." The thought filled her with warmth, but also a new layer of urgency. She wanted to find him, to see his face, to know that he was whole and safe. And yet she understood that patience, strategy, and care were as vital now as they had been during their flight through the night. As they moved through the valley, signs of life began to reappear, the distant sound of birdsong, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional glimpse of small animals scurrying through the underbrush. It was as if the world itself was slowly returning to balance, offering reassurance after the chaos of the past days. She allowed herself a small smile, realizing that even in the harshest, most unforgiving wilderness, life persisted. They found a secluded grove beside a tributary of the river, a place shielded from view by thick trees and natural stone formations. The stranger gestured for her to rest, and she sank onto the soft earth, feeling the weight of exhaustion finally catch up. The cool shade, the gentle sound of water, the faint whisper of wind through the leaves had all combined into a sense of fragile safety, a temporary peace she had not known since the beginning of their journey. "I will stay here with you for a while," the stranger said. "But soon, you must move on. There are others who can help you reach him, guide you closer to where he waits." She nodded, gratitude swelling in her chest. I don't know how to thank you." "By surviving," he replied simply. "By carrying the story forward, that is enough." Her thoughts drifted back to the Apache warrior, to the night when he had whispered those words into the darkness, "Only you, forever." She remembered the strength in his eyes, the way his hands had guided her, the fierce courage that had protected her even when the world sought to destroy them both. She realized that his promise was not just a declaration of love, it was a challenge, a call to live fully and bravely no matter the danger. Night fell again, though this time it felt different, less threatening, less oppressive. The stars shimmered overhead, bright and unyielding, silent reminder of the continuity of life and the presence of those who had gone before. She imagined him somewhere beneath the same sky, moving through his own peril, carrying the same determination that had guided her. Somewhere in the wilderness, their paths would cross again, and when they did, the world would have to acknowledge the bond that had been forged in shadows and danger. She thought of the settlers who had hunted them, their anger and fear born of misunderstanding and prejudice. Their world was rigid, unyielding, unable to see beyond the boundaries they had imposed. And yet, she also thought of the lessons she had learned from both the Apache warrior and the stranger, lessons about courage, about trust, about seeing the world in a way that could transcend fear. She realized that survival was not only about evading death, it was about preserving what was precious, about protecting love and life in a world that too often sought to snuff them out. Days passed as they moved carefully through the valleys and canyons. She grew stronger, more confident, able to anticipate dangers and recognize safe passages. Her bond with the stranger deepened, not romantic, but forged in trust and mutual reliance. A shared understanding of the stakes and the risks. And all the while, the memory of the Apache warrior guided her steps, giving her courage when fear threatened to overwhelm. One morning, they reached a small plateau overlooking a distant canyon where smoke curled faintly against the sky. The stranger's expression changed, a mix of caution and determination. "That is where you will find him," he said quietly. "He is waiting there. But be aware, the settlers have eyes everywhere. You must be careful. One mistake could undo everything." Her heart leaped. Relief, fear, and anticipation collided, leaving her breathless. She had survived the river, the canyons, the nights of terror, and now, finally, she was close. She imagined him waiting, scanning the horizon, silent and alert as he always was. The thought of seeing his face, of hearing his voice again, of feeling the strength of his presence beside her, filled her with a determination that burned brighter than any fear. They moved down the hidden path together, approaching the canyon with caution. The trees and rocks offered cover, and she kept low, watching every shadow, listening to every whisper of wind. And then, as they rounded a bend, she saw him standing tall, strong, the same resolute presence she remembered, eyes scanning the horizon, as if he had always known she would come. For a moment, time seemed to pause. All the fear, all the danger, all the nights spent running and hiding melted away in the intensity of that reunion. He turned, and their eyes met. No words were needed. The promise he had whispered in the darkness had carried her through every trial. Now, seeing him again, she understood the depth of that bond, the strength of the courage they had shared. He stepped toward her, cautious but deliberate, and she ran to him, the distance between them disappearing in an instant. Their embrace was brief, but full of all the unspoken truths. The dangers survived, and the love that had never wavered. "You made it," he said quietly, voice steady but thick with emotion. "I had to," she whispered. "Because of you, because of us." The stranger watched from a short distance, a faint smile on his lips, knowing his role in guiding her to this moment was complete. He nodded, silently giving them space, then slipped back into the shadows, leaving them alone together for the first time since the night of their separation. For a while, they simply stood there, holding each other, listening to the soft sounds of the canyon, the river, the wind, the distant call of a hawk. The world around them was still, almost reverent, as if acknowledging the trials they had endured and the bond that had carried them through. The Apache warrior finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "We have survived the night, the river, and the hunters. But now, we must decide how to live in a world that would not understand us. Survival is not enough. We must find a place where we can exist on our own terms, where we can protect each other and honor what we have." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, a mix of relief and joy, exhaustion and hope. "Then we find that place," she said. Together, they moved slowly through the canyon, planning their path. knowing that the wilderness would continue to offer both shelter and challenge. Every step forward was a choice, a declaration that love and courage could endure, even in a world that sought to destroy them. The land itself seemed to welcome them, the wind carrying the faintest whispers of guidance, the river reflecting the promise of new beginnings. In the days that followed, they found hidden valleys and quiet groves, places untouched by the world of settlements and settlers' fear. They hunted, fished, and built shelters, learning to read the land as he had taught her, discovering the strength in their unity and the resilience in their love. They were not entirely free. The world beyond the canyon still existed, still held dangers, but in their corner of the wilderness. They carved out a space where love, trust, and courage could flourish, and in the quiet moments, beneath the stars, she would hear again the words that had guided her through every trial, and she would whisper back into the night, "Only you, forever." The canyon held its silence, the river its steady flow, and the wind its ancient songs. They had survived, they had found each other, and in that survival, they had discovered something more powerful than fear or hatred. They had discovered the strength to live, the courage to love, and the understanding that even in the harshest wilderness, the heart could find its way home. The story of that night, the river, the hunters, and the whispered promises was now theirs alone, a testament to endurance, to love, and to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to surrender to fear. And as the sun rose fully over the canyon, painting the land with light and warmth, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by the words that had carried them through the darkness, "Only you forever."